Away from all of that to some serious news now, where in Gibraltar, where the Royal Marines have boarded an oil tanker on its way to Syria, which they claim breaches European sanctions. Gibraltar says it has detained the tanker on suspicion of carrying crude oil to Syria. The Marines were flown out to lead the mission at the request of the Gibraltar police. Mapping data showed how that tanker had sailed from Iran, and interestingly, if the oil on board is confirmed to be Iranian, the tanker would also be violating US ban on Iranian oil exports. In its statement, the Gibraltarian government claims to have reasonable grounds to believe that the tanker was carrying its shipment of crude oil to a refinery in Syria.
In the early hours of this morning, Gibraltar port and law enforcement agencies, assisted by a detachment of Royal Marines, boarded a supertanker carrying crude oil to Syria. We have detained the vessel and its cargo. This action arose from information giving the Gibraltar government reasonable grounds to believe that the vessel, the Grace 1, was acting in breach of European Union sanctions against Syria. In fact, we have reason to believe that the Grace 1 was carrying its shipment of crude oil to the Banyas refinery in Syria. That refinery is the property of an entity that is subject to European Union sanctions against Syria.
Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May's spokesperson has welcomed the action to enforce European Union sanctions. They've commended Gibraltarian authorities involved in successfully carrying out the operation, but Spain has denied to comment, saying though they were aware of the operation, they are still looking into how it affects their sovereignty because the detention happened on Spanish waters. Remember, European Union sanctions against the Syrian government took effect in the May of 2011, shortly after the start of President Bashar al-Assad's crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators. Now, a recent discovery throws light on one of the many mysteries of the Christian Bible. DNA tests helped researchers in tracking down the origins of an ancient people often quoted in the Holy Book, the Philistines, often portrayed as villains and violent.
A team of archaeologists in Israel, with the help of sophisticated DNA tests, have managed to solve one of the most mysterious biblical enigmas. In Christian mythology, there are many stories related to the Philistines, an ancient people portrayed as villains and enemies of the Israelites. The story of how a young Israelite shepherd, David, killed the violent Philistine giant Goliath with his sling is one of the most famous tales in the Bible. Researchers knew that the Philistines lived in southern Israel and in today's Gaza, but where they came from was a mystery.
Our study has shown for the first time that the Philistines immigrated to this region in the 12th century. We didn't show it by showing similar styles of pottery. We didn't show it by looking at texts. We showed it by looking at the DNA of the people themselves. And we were able to show that in the 12th century, we can see at Ashkelon new DNA coming in from this immigrant population that is really changing the whole region.
The team took DNA samples from skeletons found in the first Philistine cemetery ever discovered near the southern Israeli city of Ashkelon. The inner ear managed to preserve DNA samples over millennia.
This ancestral component is derived from Europe, or to be more specific, from southern Europe. So the ancestors of the Philistines must have traveled across the Mediterranean and arrive in Ashkelon sometimes between the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age.
The data also shows what happened next.
There's a second conclusion to the study that I think is also very interesting. Not only did we find what happened in the 12th century, but we also found what happened a few hundred years later. What we found out was that after a few hundred years, the Philistines intermarried with the people around them and no longer looked distinctive genetically. Even though they didn't look distinctive genetically, we still have them remembering that they came from someplace else. So even hundreds of years after their genetic distinctiveness was lost, we still read that the Philistines think of themselves as people who came from outside.
We got to lift that up. That's what we're.
This discovery will portray how the human species evolved throughout history, explaining why modern societies are the result of millennia of migration processes and intertwinement between newcomers and locals. DNA tests have shown how every human being carries genes coming from different and often very distant places.
This discovery tells us also a lot about the very nature of West Asia, a place located between the East and the West on commercial routes for centuries, millennia. Traders, merchants, armies, soldiers and immigrants met and mixed here, giving birth to the very diversified society that inhabits this region. Daniele Pagani, reporting from Jordan for WION, World is One.